I always want to say good morning because that's usually when I record, but it doesn't mean that you're watching this in the morning. But good morning. Hello and welcome back, or welcome for the first time. There's a lot of new folks and that's pretty exciting, so hopefully you find something here that is at least entertaining, if not informative. It is officially spring, and with the return of spring comes the return of my allergies. So if I look a little extra sleepy today, we can thank the outdoors for that. Stupid outdoors. When I read through sewing forums or when I talk to people who are just getting into sewing, I oftentimes hear kind of the same question, and that is, what is the perfect first project for people who have never sewed before? Oftentimes I see answers like, make scrunchies or pillowcases. Those are great first projects, but I know for me, that's not a project that would entice me to want to sew more. I am an instant gratification millennial here. I want something done now. So when I think about sewing projects, I try to pick things that are generally instantly satisfying. This video is my take on the perfect first project. And my goal for this is to share with you something that is not only pretty easy, but also satisfying and cheap, like uber cheap. I'm hoping this is gonna be under $20 cheap. We are also going to do this without a sewing machine. But first, I need everybody who's gonna follow along to make a little pledge. Grab something that is near you. I have my lamp. And I would like you to repeat after me. I, insert your name, solemnly swear to give myself grace. I will embrace all of my mistakes as learning opportunities and finish the damn thing even when I get frustrated, lazy, bored, or overwhelmed. The end. So we're gonna make a skirt today out of a thrifted bedsheet, some needles, some pins, and some thread, and maybe a button. We are going to be nice to ourselves. If you're just beginning, you're going to make mistakes. This is not going to turn out perfect, and that's okay. But I hope that this is a project that at least shows you why sewing is so fun and gratifying. I think with all of that, we can go ahead and get started.
First, let's talk supplies. You need your bedsheet, some scissors, some thread, pins, sewing needle, and one button. And maybe a cat, just to keep things spicy. Next, we're going to get our waistband set up. My sheet, I thrifted for $1, and it's 100% cotton from LL Bean. I'm going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to cut the top hem off, right at the point where it meets the rest of the sheet. The reason we do this is because it has a nice, crisp fold, and we're going to use that to tuck all of our pleating or gathering from the skirt. Then we'll set that aside and move on to the next step. The only measurements you need for this project are your waist and the length that you want. For my waist, I'm using just a piece of yarn, and I want a 2-inch overlap where that yarn meets along my waist. For the length, I like my skirts to hit where my waist bends to just below my knee, and that's where I'm going to cut my second piece.
So I now have my 2 measuring strings cut. I have my waist. When I wrap it around my waist, it overlaps by about 2 inches, and that allows space to fold in the raw edges, and I'll talk about that. It also allows space for the button flap to come over so that it's not gapping, if that makes any sense at all. Think about the way your pants overlap. That's what we want as well. The length measurement also doesn't matter. You measure that wherever you want it to fall. If you like shorter skirts, great. If you want them to the floor, also great. Just be conscious of how it's gonna fit on your sheet. And we will lay it all out and we will start cutting the actual panels. Let go. I said let's go. Why are you still here? Go.
Because this is a queen size sheet, I was able to fold this widthways or hot dog style and fit my waist measurement along the bottom hem. which means now I can use that bottom hem for my skirt. The length measurement, I'm going to measure up from the bottom hem and make some cuts. I'm not doing any marking with this. I'm just using that string that I measured my length with and just moving it down the sheet until I've cut the whole thing approximately the right size. And remember, this is a beginner project, so approximately is just fine. I'm going to cut up that middle side as well to divide this into 2 panels, and I can move on to the next step. Now I have 2 panels that are pretty much identical, and they are each a little longer than my waist measurement, which is great. So I have my front panel and then my back panel. I've talked about this time and time again. I use the factory hems. So I use the bottom of the bed sheet right along here and right along here, and that's going to be the bottom of my skirt. That means I don't have to hem the bottom of my skirt, which is why it makes this such a great beginner project. So now that I have my skirt panels, we're going to sew them together, and then we'll talk about putting them into the waistband. And you might be asking, hey, shouldn't we iron this? And the answer is yes, but I'm not going to, because we're beginners. We don't iron things when we're beginning. Let's learn from this and see how it goes. So let me show you how to hand sew this piece to this piece. What's the matter, buddy? What's wrong, Brucey? So I have my 2 skirt panels pinned together. I started from the bottom because that's the side that I want to match, and I don't want to make any additional adjustments. If it doesn't match at the top, it's no big deal, because that's going to be inside a waistband and nobody's going to see it. So the only thing you need to match is at the bottom. I'm going to hand sew, we are going to hand sew starting from the bottom up to the top on only one side. I'll talk about what to do with the next side later. We're going to start from the bottom and we're going to stitch our way up to the top. So we'll see how this turns out, because I never feel like hand sewing is real. I always feel like as soon as I look at it funny, it's going to pop a stitch and the whole thing's going to fall apart. That has never happened, but I still feel that way. Look at this. This is nap time for everybody. So let's thread our needle and get to hand sewing. And I'll try to show you as best I can. So I'm sitting here editing. I'm laying here editing. And I realized I didn't explain hand sewing very well. And I filmed it, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So my recommendation is to go find a very short YouTube video that explains hand sewing in a way that makes sense to you. Because I can explain it in a way that kind of makes sense to me, but I have no idea if it makes sense to anybody else. So rather than dribble on for 3 to 5 minutes about how to hand sew, there are lots of good YouTube videos out there about it. Go look at one of those real quick and then you can come back. I think it'll just save all of us a lot of time. Yeah. Start your back stitches at the bottom where the hem starts, and then do running stitches with an occasional back stitch to keep everything secure. And here's what that ends up looking like. I have a nice wide seam allowance so that the fabric can fray if it needs to, or I can roll it and tack it down. But I do 2 running stitches followed by a back stitch. And then this is my beginning where I did 2 or 3 back stitches, and then I took it all the way up to the top. Once you get to the top, do 2 or 3 more back stitches to keep it secure, and you can take all your pins out, and we're ready to move on to the waistband. Once you have your waistband cut to size, unfold it face side down. Then you fold this strip in half, leaving a 2-inch overhang that we're going to use for our buttonhole. You're also going to want to put a couple of pins in this fold so that you know where we need to place the side seam of the skirt. Now you can unfold the whole thing, face side down, and place the side seam of the skirt on top of those pins on one side of the fold. At this point, it doesn't matter if you put the skirt in face up or face down, so you go with what feels right. And make sure to pin that side seam in place so it doesn't shift around. The next step is to pin the other side of this skirt panel to the end of the waistband. And make sure to fold the waistband end over the skirt panel so that it makes a nice clean edge. But with the skirt pinned at the center seam and the end, now we can pleat everything in place between those two pins. I like to also pin down the middle of that skirt panel to the center point between those two pins just to give me a smaller area to start pleating, but that's entirely up to you. Live dangerously, pleat however you want to pleat. There are a lot of great tutorials on YouTube about how to pleat properly. I do not follow any of those. I am a free pleater kind of person. So here I'm just estimating the size of the pleats that I want. When I get them pretty close, I'll pin them down. You do have to pin each and every pleat or else they will fall out somehow. So make sure that as you go through this to pin everything in place, catching the waistband. Because if you don't do that, they'll fall and it'll make you cry. You don't need to ask why I know that. Look at this really cool footage of me putting in pleats really fast. This might look impressive, but my pleats are not even or even the same size. Once you have the skirt pinned into the waistband, you want to try it on and make sure that it overlaps just right. And what I mean by just right is that making sure that those side seams overlap just a little bit so you're not flashing your business at everybody, but not so much that it causes weird bunching. You may also want to try this on after a big meal or sitting down just to make sure that it is the right kind of comfortable. You know, don't forget that you're going to be wearing this and you're a person, so take a deep breath and make sure that you can still fit in it. And if you need to take some of the pleats out and shift them closer to that buttonhole placket, you can do that.
So I have all the pleats in, and when I put it up to my waist, it is a little tight. So what I may do is go back and undo some of the pleats so that I have a little more overlap of my skirt panels. I ate a big breakfast this morning, so we're right at the edge of where it would fit comfortably after a big meal. So with that in mind, I think what I want to do is ease it out just a little bit more. So instead of having a 2-inch tail to my waistband, I think I'll take it down to maybe like a 1.5 or 1-inch tail there. So I'll ease out some of the pleats, give myself a little bit more breathing room, and then I'll show you how to tack down the waistband so that it keeps the pleats in place, and then we can finish it and make it look pretty, put a button in, and we're done. We're just about done.
Once you have the pleats set the way you want them to, put the skirt face down on the floor, completely flat, and start folding in the bottom edge of your waistband. So don't forget to start right at the edge of the panel. So you want to fold that edge underneath and you want to pin it down so that you get all of the raw edges inside the waistband. To sew down your waistband, you can use the same running stitch we talked about earlier, or you can do what's called a felling stitch. Now, I would recommend you go watch a couple of videos about this. Bernadette Banner has some great videos that really explain how to do this well. But the basics are that you start your needle underneath the flap, catch the lower fabric with the needle and thread, and then bring it back up into your top fabric. The idea of backstitching works here. So in order to make sure that it's solid, you want to stitch in the same place a couple of times, and then you can fell all the way down the waistband. So again, you take your needle, catch the lower fabric, you should be able to feel it with your finger underneath, and then bring it up through the top fabric. Catch the fabric underneath, and then bring it up through the top fabric. It's hard to see here, but those stitches get all of the layers underneath the waistband, but from the top, they're very difficult to see. And I love this stitch because it is so clean, but it does take a little bit of time to get used to. Also, if you struggle to push the needle through all of those layers of fabric, go down a size. Sometimes people think that if it's a tougher thing to sew that they need a bigger needle, when actually the opposite is true. If it's tough to sew, you actually need to go down a size, so it's finer and sharper and easier to go through fabrics. But when you go down a size, those needles will bend. And here's what felling looks like in real time. Captivating content, I know. When you get to the tail end of your waistband, you need to continue to tuck everything under so that we get rid of that raw edge. But you also need to tuck in the ends. And this kind of needs 3 hands to make it work. Maybe you have 3 hands, who am I to judge about that? But tuck a little bit, pin it, and then tuck a little bit and pin it. Don't be afraid to use as many pins as you need to for this. And once you move away from the skirt and you're just dealing with the tail end, just continue the same type of stitch you've been using. So if you were using a running stitch, keep on using it. If you were doing a felling stitch, just keep on using it. The only goal really is to get that raw edge tacked up and out of the way. Once you have the back side done, the same premise applies to the front. Now you just need to make sure it looks a little bit better. So hopefully you use the back as practice. But you're going to take the pins out of the pleats. Please do not leave them in the pleats. That's a nasty surprise. Once those pins are out, you're going to tuck the raw edge up underneath the waistband and pin it in place. And once you get the whole thing pinned, then you're going to stitch it down. So you can use that felling stitch, or you can use a running stitch with an occasional back just to make it secure. Once you get to the button flap part, make sure that those raw edges are folded in on themselves, including the very end of the flap. Pin everything down. It's fine if it's not even. Remember, we're gonna try our best. Sometimes our best just isn't even. And sometimes you can't even. I got jokes. So get everything folded in, pin it down, and then use whatever stitch makes you happy to get those secured.
Welcome to day 2. So yesterday we got everything cut out. We got the skirt pleated and put into the waistband. And overall, it looks pretty good. So what we need to do today is get the buttonhole sewed in, figure out where the button needs to be placed, attach the button, and then we need to sew up the last side seam. Once we get those 3 things done, we should be finished. And yeah, we can find a place to frolic or something, or sit down outside because it's hot. Let's do the buttonhole first and see how that goes.
Your buttonhole is going to go at the end of the flap. So you take your button and you put pins on either side to mark how wide you need this buttonhole to be. You want to make sure that your buttonhole is not right at the edge, because that'll cause weird things to happen. But I like to set it back maybe 1/2 inch or so from the edge of the button flap. We're going to cut a straight horizontal line between those 2 pins in the horizontal middle of the waistband. You don't want the button at the top of the waistband and you don't want it at the bottom of the waistband. You want it right in the middle. I think that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. Let me know if that didn't make sense. With the buttonhole cut, now you have to sew around the edges to make sure it doesn't fray or tear. The best way to do this is start your needle from the back side, take it to the front, and then before you pull it all the way through, wrap the thread around the needle once. This creates a little faux knot around it and gives your buttonhole a little extra coverage. And you just do that all the way around until you've got it completely sewn up. It's okay to have some extra threads hanging out there. As long as you can still pass your button all the way through, you're good to go. With the buttonhole now sewn in, it's time to decide where the button goes. You need to mark where the button is going to be sewn on. I do this by putting the skirt on where I want it to fall and cinching in the waist where it's still comfortable, but the side edges line up just right. And then with just a regular pen, I put a little mark where the button needs to be sewn onto. And remember that the button doesn't sit in the center of the buttonhole, it sits at the edge. And so when you have that mark made, then you're going to sew the button on. And for some reason, we put a couple of base stitches down without the button. I'm not sure why we do this, and it may not even be necessary, but I put in a couple of stitches right over that mark, and then I bring the needle up from the bottom through the point that I marked, set the button on the needle, and then bring it the rest of the way through. This way I know that the button sits exactly where I want it to go. I sew through each set of holes 3 or 4 times, and then I'll wind the thread around the post. So that's the thread that is between the button and the fabric. And I'll wind that a couple of times, and then I take the needle to the back side, tack it down a couple of times, and maybe even tie it with some loose tails back there. And then the button is done.
Once you have the buttonhole done and the button sewed on, nice and secure, the last step in this is we have to get this side seam sewed up if we want to be able to wear this in public without having to wear leggings all the time. And the one thing that you have to think about is you have to leave enough space open so that you can get this on and off. So what that means is when it comes to the side seam, we're gonna have to leave it unsewn somewhere towards the top, usually maybe 4 or 5 inches from the top down. And that's just enough space that when it's unbuttoned, it gives us room to pull it on. Oh, my sun's going away. We're gonna put this back on, and we are going to pin it probably 3 or 4 inches down and see if we can get it on and off, and then adjust that as necessary. And once we get that spot figured out, then we'll turn these edges in and we'll hand sew the rest of the way down. So once we get that done, we will be finished. We will be completely done with all of it.
For this last step, we put the skirt back on. We kind of estimate down probably 4 to 5 inches, and we put a pin. And that's going to mark where we stop sewing. Make sure that it fits over your hips. If you plan on wearing shorts under these, make sure you're wearing those when you try this on and off. Trust me, you need to. Get that last side sewn up, and it's time to show off your hard work.
We're finished. It is very, very sweaty out there. We went from 40s and below, a mini blizzard, to almost 90 in like a week and a half. So hopefully this project was something that you felt was doable. There is nothing out there that says that it has to be done perfect, and chances are the first time you do this, the last time you do this, it's not gonna be perfect. For mine, my side opening thing gapes just a little bit. Now, if I were wearing bike shorts with pockets underneath, it would be perfect because I can kind of reach in and access that pocket without having to hike up the side of my skirt and make people think that I'm flashing them. Some things are great, some things need a little bit more work. I would encourage you to try this again and again and again. Other than the sheet, you can reuse just about all of the supplies that we got for this. So let's break down the total price for this, because at the beginning of this video, I did say I wanted this to come in hopefully under 20 bucks. Let's look at our supply list and how much everything costs. For me, the bed sheet was $1. I thrifted this from my local Goodwill, and all of their bed sheets are $1. The scissors, you can get those in a 2-pack from Amazon for about 20 bucks, and I will link that below. Now you're only using one set, so I'm gonna count that as $10. But again, you can use these over and over and over again, so it's not a disposable supply, I guess. The case of sewing needles from Michaels, so sweaty, was about $4, and I think there are 1,000,000 needles in there. And then the pins with the yellow head, those again were about $3. And the button I found on the floor in my house. I don't know where it came from, so that was free. So I'm not a math person, but I believe that gets us to about this much. And I think we are well under our $20 mark. I am so appreciative of everyone who is subscribed. If you haven't yet, go ahead and do that. Give this video a like. And let me know which parts you wish I would have covered more, or if there's another beginner project you'd like to see. Until next time, bye!